Plank Recap here on the Pewter Plank Radio Network, recapping a Monday night win for the Tampa Bay Buccaneers, but it was not an impressive win. I am here with Patrik Nohe, the editor of thepewterplank.com. We're going to be breaking down what transpired yesterday on Monday Night Football. Now, Patrik, I have to say, first of all, I was hoping the Buccaneers would win so I could rub in the misfortunes of the Atlanta Braves and the Miami Dolphins, but after the Tampa Bay Buccaneers game on Monday, they're not too far off from those two teams, are they?
No, they're quite a bit better than those two teams, but they had an opportunity to come out and really make a nice statement on national television, and they didn't really do that. And, it was a missed opportunity. They ended up winning the game, and a win is a win, and you can't be too upset. They're 3-1. I mean, the Dolphins are 0-4, so there's a pretty big difference right there. But, it's not the resounding win you were looking for.
Not at all, and one thing that kept the game from being what many would say is interesting is the sheer amount of penalties that were called in the game. At the end, it was a total of 20 penalties called on both teams. 106 yards were lost for the Tampa Bay Buccaneers due to penalties. What did you see in the refereeing crew that upset you the most about all of the flags that were thrown last night?
Oh, that was Old Man Winter's crew, and that's they kind of have a nice reputation around the NFL, I think, for being one of the more flag-happy crews. And there were a number of penalties that I really just kind of was appalled by. Unfortunately, my timing was rather bad. On Twitter, I was commenting about how appalling it was to call an unnecessary roughness on a receiver throwing a block on a defensive lineman right as one of the Colts defensive linemen seemed to have had his leg twisted around backwards, and it might have come off as being a bit insensitive, which was not how I meant it. But, I mean, in the spirit of the game, it's supposed to be a physical game. You're supposed to allow a certain degree of physicality with the play, and it just seemed like that wasn't going tonight. And there wasn't really a whole lot of consistency with the calls. There were a number of calls that seemed to go the Colts' way, that didn't go the Bucs' way. 13 penalties, it seemed like they went 100 yards. I don't know if that's the final count, but that's just appalling. And, that's somewhat on the Bucs. I mean, they had to take into account for that as well. But at the same time, the officials were a bit flag-happy there. And, I mean, you would have to agree, wouldn't you?
I was not happy at all with the sheer amount of flags that were called. You take a look at the first half. The first half alone took about maybe 2.5 hours to just get to halftime, and that had a lot to do with the penalties. And yes, the Tampa Bay Buccaneers are very much at fault for what happened there, but a lot of that was, questionable penalty calling. Now, something else that was questionable that I am not happy about either is how good the Tampa Bay Buccaneers made the Indianapolis Colts, and particularly something called Curtis Painter, on Monday Night Football. The end stats with Curtis Painter here, he's got 281 yards and 2 big touchdowns to Pierre Garçon. What out of Curtis Painter? And you said on last week's show that he was a terrible quarterback and the Bucs were essentially going to eat him alive. And I, too, shared that sentiment in terms of what the Bucs would do to Curtis Painter. But what happened to let Curtis Painter go 281 yards on this, what we thought was a very good Tampa Bay Buccaneers defense?
Well, I think you're going to look at the film and see two just very bad plays by the Buccaneers defense that allowed him to look so good and pick up, I would say, probably about 130 of those yards. Other than that, I didn't think he was remarkable at all. I thought he was pretty pedestrian, quite frankly. I like I said last week, I don't want to belittle him. He's obviously a lot better than I would be, but he's not a good NFL quarterback. And the Bucs did do him many favors tonight. They gave him a lot of opportunities to really stay in the game and to, kind of get lucky on some broken down coverages and on some plays where the defense was just slow getting where they needed to, or missed some tackles. And yeah, he looked like he had a great night. If you didn't watch the game and you looked at the box score, you'd say, hey, maybe the Colts have some life with this Curtis Painter. Anyway, I think you could watch him on the majority of his dropbacks look a little bit lost. I mean, the Buccaneers' defensive line certainly batted him around a bit. I don't think he looked fantastic, but certainly on those 2 plays he did. If you wanted to make a highlight reel out of those 2 plays, you have a pretty nice start.
Despite allowing Curtis Painter to have what some would say is a good night, but I would still say, like you, not an impressive night in terms of quarterback stats. The defense continued to give the offense opportunities to score points, which they didn't do, which was another very frustrating aspect of yesterday's game. But 4 sacks on Curtis Painter last night. But what about all of those dropped interceptions that the Bucs had? Aqib Talib had 2. I believe E.J. Biggers had a couple. What was up with the defensive secondary that not only allowed Pierre Garçon to have 2 huge plays, but drop all of those interceptions that easily could have made this a blowout?
Well, I think first of all they were being a little bit. I think they overestimated themselves a bit and thought that they could go man-to-man with a pretty good Colts receiving core just because Peyton Manning was out. And that proved not to be the case. The Colts have some pretty talented receivers, and I think they won some of those matchups. I know the Biggers potential pick, that was tipped by Reggie Wayne, so I don't really hold that one too much against him. But there was one elite pick that he really could have probably gone the distance with if he had just concentrated and gotten a hold of it. That's a perfect example of why Curtis Painter is not a good NFL quarterback, because I rewound that play probably 3-4 times and just sat there and said, what the hell was he thinking? He was covered the whole time. There was no good reason to throw that pass. It should have been a touchdown for the Bucs the other direction. But, that's just, you get those some weeks, you don't the others. It tends to happen. But you really can't be too frustrated with it. I think that the Bucs secondary got lucky. I think they need to bring Tenard Jackson back for sure. But, NFL hasn't ruled on it yet. They can't bring him back until they do. So, hopefully they'll be able to get a little bit of help in that direction, because I think the safety play is a bit questionable. I think that the game plan going to man-to-man was a little bit questionable as well, too.
And if we want to talk about dropped catches, we have to include Mike Williams. Here's a guy who the Bucs were looking at for having a pretty good year, and I was looking at in particular having a pretty good night. He doesn't do anything. Mike Williams finishes with 5 catches, 66 yards, stays out of the end zone. What's happening with Mike Williams? Have the defenses figured him out, putting double coverage on him? Is he just dropping the balls? Was it last year just a fluke? What's up with Mike Williams to where he's not able to catch a ball on the sideline like he's supposed to?
Oh, I don't know that I would call it that. And where you would choose to highlight Mike Williams having a couple drops. 66 yards on a bad night. I would turn around and highlight, Preston Parker having a fantastic night, really stepping up with Sammy Strotter out. And as we've talked about on the site, Preston Parker has really been fantastic the first week of the season. I don't think there's anything to worry about with Mike Williams. Yes, he is beginning to draw some double coverage. People certainly know what he's capable of now. But at the same time, you have to just look at what some of the other players were able to stand up and do, and just look at the entire Bucs offense worked at the beginning of this game. They really didn't have a whole lot of rhythm. They didn't really seem to be able to get much going. Every time they did, there seemed to be a penalty. So, I don't really think that there was too much to worry about as far as Williams goes. You saw a great night out of Preston Parker. Obviously, LeGarrette Blount had a fantastic evening running the ball. So, I think there's plenty of good things going on. It's just the offense needs to find rhythm.
That's a perfect segue to start talking about some of the positive aspects of last night's game, like Preston Parker. He is the September MVP on the Pewter Plank. He tops the receiving charts last night. Who do you think, in terms of moving the ball for the Buccaneers, had the better game? Was it LeGarrette Blount, who you could say, looking at the stat sheet, had the better night with 25 carries and 127 yards? Or was it Preston Parker, who stayed lower on the statistics chart, did get into the end zone, only 70 yards, but he was always there to extend third down drives? Who to you, Blount or Parker, had the better night in terms of moving the ball for the Buccaneers?
Oh, I think it was Blount, and I think if they had gone in the direction more, we would have had an even better night. They had plenty open that they just didn't really exploit. Every time you saw Dwight Freeney on the field, the gap where he was lined up was just so significant. They really could have attacked that for a good play every single time. But, they chose to try to do a little bit of a different game plan. I don't think that necessarily their offense really worked the way that it would have been the most effective against this Colts defense. But, that goes down to play calling and the offensive coordinator. It's a completely different discussion. But I think it was LeGarrette Blount, and I think you saw really what we've been saying the whole time, which is if you let him be fresh down the stretch in the fourth quarter, he can really take over a game. And that's exactly what he did. That Colts team is undersized on his defense. And it's a talented defense, but it's predicated on speed. And if you have a speedy defense, that means it's going to wear down if you keep them on the field for the majority of the game, which the Bucs had some success keeping him on the field over the course of the second half. And with LeGarrette Blount, as big as he is and as powerful as he is, you saw him just really begin to crash through, the second levels of that team. And, he eventually got the touchdown. He really was the one that turned the tide of the game. I mean, he's a great weapon. I just wish the Bucs would exploit him the right way and more often and, use him like he's supposed to be used because he really could be, an all-pro running back if they used him the right way.
Now let's settle this debate right now because it is going to come up among those who are obsessed with the stats. Curtis Painter finished with an NFL quarterback rating of 99.4. Josh Freeman finishes with 94.7. On the paper, it looks like Curtis Painter had the better night. In the first half, it looked like Curtis Painter was going to have the better night. But what about Josh Freeman and his uncanny ability to lead this team makes him the better quarterback? Just so we can put to rest any debate of what kind of quarterback Josh Freeman is and throw out this stupid stats thing that's going to make it look like Curtis Painter had the better night. You tell me why Josh Freeman was the superior quarterback tonight, just to silence everybody who questions him.
Just look at what they did in the second half. I mean, that's all you have to do. You just look at what both quarterbacks did in the second half, specifically in the fourth quarter. I mean, you look at who got the win, and that's really all it comes down to in this league is who wins. And if you're a quarterback that can come out 10-6 every year, you're going to keep your job. And that's why Curtis Painter will not be starting next season, and might not even be in the NFL. And Josh Freeman is going to be starting for the Bucs as long as they'll have him. So, or as long as rather he'll have them. I should say. But that's really the difference. When it comes down to it, Josh Freeman can be on an offense that lollygags the entire first half, doesn't really accomplish much, doesn't seem to have much focus. But when push comes to shove, he's the type of quarterback that takes charge, and he finds the receivers that are open. He makes the plays with his legs. I mean, you saw him on several different third down plays where he ran, managed to pick up the first down, and just did all kinds of good things that, that's what winners do. And that's really all you can say. And I hate to just go to the cliche answer where it's like, oh, well, he's the winner. But, I mean, you watched him play tonight. You saw what he did. It was on a nationally televised game. You saw what he's capable of. He is fantastic when it comes down to it, and that's really what I think America needs to see is that, despite all the statistics you can throw out there and, who has a higher quarterback rating and for more yards and all of that stuff, when push comes to shove, Josh Freeman is one of those quarterbacks that you want with the ball in his hands because he's going to go out there and win games for you. He's not worried about making a mistake. He's worried about making the play, and that's the type of guy you want in your franchise.
All right, let's wrap this up, and let's look quickly ahead to the Tampa Bay Buccaneers' next game, which is against another 3-1 team, the San Francisco 49ers. It's another road game. Last year, Tampa Bay got their first shutout. I believe it was 21-0 against the San Francisco 49ers. Obviously, new coach, new system in San Francisco, not unlike the one here in Tampa, in place in San Francisco. What is going to be different about next week's matchup against the San Francisco 49ers, and is it going to be a game that Tampa Bay may lose? And if they win, how big of a game is that going to be as in terms of a win in Tampa Bay's belt?
It could be a pretty big win. I don't know how seriously I take San Francisco, to be honest with you. They're 3-1, and I think that's fantastic, and they've got a new coach, but I want to see that over a stretch of 7-8 games before I'm really willing to say, oh yeah, they're headed in the right direction. I will say they've got some very talented components on that team. Frank Gore's a great back. Patrick Willis is a great linebacker. I mean, there are some definite pieces that I think could contribute to a winning squad. So I don't necessarily know that it's going to be an easy game, but it's kind of what I talked about pregame with the Bucs. It doesn't matter what the other team has done or is capable of or anything like that. You need to approach every week as if it's a vacuum, like a team like the Patriots or the Steelers do, and see what does this team do, how can we attack it, how can we stop it, and what's going to make us successful here, independent of their previous results or your previous results. And I think if the Bucs approach it in that direction, they certainly aren't outclassed in this game. I don't think that the 49ers are going to be able to throw anything at them they're not going to be able to stop or they're not going to be able to, beat. It's just a matter of, the preparation and everything they put into it, and, the play calling and how they come out in the start of the game. If they let themselves fall behind and keep behind the 8 ball, as we talked about, it could be a completely different story. But I think it's a game they should win. I kind of expect them to go to 4-1. But, ultimately that comes down to how they're going to approach the game and how seriously they're going to take themselves and, what kind of team they want to be.
Well, I'm going to go ahead and say that they're going to win next week, too, and that worked out good when we both said they were going to win last week, and hopefully it's going to transform into another win next week. Are you going to do this again next week, Patrick?
Yeah, that sounds good. I will talk to you after the game.
All right, he's Patrik Nohe, the editor at thepewterplank.com, and I'm Josh Hill, assistant editor over at thepewterplank.com. We will be right back recapping the rest of the show for you. 24-17, Tampa Bay wins on Monday Night Football. It's the Pewter Plank Recap on Pewter Plank Radio Network.